next time.
And Cara will be doing the minutes from the recording, so it's just important that we use the microphone so that it makes her job a bit easier.
Well, it gives me a chance to vocalize a little bit, too. Maybe I'll sing a little song.
She's going to be sorry she missed this meeting in person.
I'll give you my Elvis impersonation. Great. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And we have a lot to talk about today. And we will start with the governance and procedures. Nancy will be serving as a voting member. We have a quorum for any votes. I don't think we have any formal votes, but a lot of interaction and points of view, I'm hoping, from each and every one of us. We have minutes of March 19th, which were drafted. I just received them, so I'll be honest, I have not had a chance to read them. There's a copy for you, Marin, if you like, right there. I think since I haven't read them, if you would give me the liberty of deferring our vote on this until next meeting, but we can have them posted, Adam, if you'd like.
They are.
So they're available to
Yep.
the public
They are.
in draft form, and we'll make any corrections that are necessary at the next meeting. On our agenda next is a discussion and an update on the HOP grant. I will pass out to you just so you know that it's real. A correspondence I had from Melissa Del Tufo, who's an administrative person at Plan New Hampshire, which is the agency under New Hampshire Housing Finance that manages the dispersal of the funds. So I'm going to pass those along. Just to refresh your memory, we had been notified earlier in April, thank you. We have some extras if you'd like. I try to make extras, but sometimes I got some here. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Earlier in April, we were notified by New Hampshire Housing Finance that the conditionally approved grant application that we filed last year the pool has received additional funding as a request of the governor and the executive council, and so monies will be available for our grant. We don't know whether it will be fully funded or partially funded, but we have a very good chance of having it funded, we've been told. I don't want to be any more optimistic than that, but because things happen in government finance. But be that as it may, because the timelines had changed, the deadline by which the funds would need to be expended, the New Hampshire Housing Finance administrators requested that we resubmit the timeline budget or the exhibit that showed what actions would be taken and by what deadline. In conversing with Adam and Steve Whitman and touch bases with Kim, we responded with an additional timeline, revised timeline, which aims towards the new deadline is September 2026. So being analytical as I am, I sat down and made a chart for myself. This was not submitted to New Hampshire Housing Finance, but it was just kind of a doodle chart that I did. Thank you, Adam.
So Peter, while he's passing that out, what amount of money do we think we might be getting?
We had requested a total of $103,000 and
Right.
change. And I don't mean to be glib about the change because every nickel counts, but it's an exact number that's $103,000.
Okay.
And it as you can see on this chart, you look at the left-hand column, it has different phases. The first phase is sort of the community outreach phase. The second phase, there's more traction and study. All the time, there's community engagement. And then the third phase is more looking at specific ideas for what could and should be done or proposed for revision to zoning. So the original application and this revised time frame is really oriented towards potentially, and I say potentially, some sort of zoning considerations for March 2026. So we have a good year, at least, a year and a half, to engage in the community, to educate ourselves more, to listen to experts. Steve Whitman is really good at this stuff. That's one of the reasons I've recommended it from the get-go. He's done this in lots of towns, and he's been doing a lot of thinking about how best to lay this out for us. I have not asked him to put forth a program because his time is money, and we're really right on the edge of our budget right now. Let me jump ahead a little bit. The reason we're on the edge of our budget is because over the past 12 months, Steve and his colleague, Zach Broinski, have been doing the GIS study, the inventory study. And at the May 1st meeting, which you'll see on your agenda, 7 o'clock, May 1st, in Whipple Hall, they're going to be showing us a draft of what they've been doing. And it's, as you may remember, it's a GIS-based inventory and interface with our assessor's data, which has a lot of different queries that can be checked and unchecked to see what the inventory of what we have really is. It's a tool that's amazing. Adam has been on several conference calls with Steve Whitman and his colleague, and so that's where our funds have been going. This is all, by the way, preparatory work for, hi.
I'm just measuring the stage.
Oh, okay, all right. You want to?
You'll be on video, just.
It is what it is. I tried to get in here earlier, and there was a dance recital.
Ah, okay. Well, if you just dance quietly up there, it'll be fine.
I figure out if the Kearsarge band will fit in here.
Okay, okay.
Cozy.
Be a little tight. I don't think it'll make it, but I promise to make
Maybe
it.
there could be some down here.
Can't some be on the floor?
Pardon?
Can't some be down?
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Not really.
As we proceed, where was I?
Thanks for asking.
Yes, so what Steve Whitman has been doing is doing the first step of our inventory, which will be a significant part of Phase 1 if and when our grant is funded. He has a lot more work to do, but we were running on a tight budget. So the status of the project, the grant funding, is that we have submitted a response to this email. The points, the 4 points or 3 points on the email are, first of all, the application of scope of the work is similar to what was originally submitted. However, the budget showed some changes by phase. And there was a correction made. These are very subtle, minor corrections, but the corrections were made and resubmitted as of yesterday. Number 2 question was, New London did a significant amount of work on detached ADUs in the interim, but it unfortunately did not pass at town meeting. What is the new plan, and does this change the scope presented? And the answer to that is yes. The vote that we heard in March was different than what we had planned, but it's a very clear message to what we need to do, which is to reach out on community engagement and some visionary work, understand what we have and what the possibilities are and what the desire of the community is. So the answer to number 2 is, does that change the scope? The answer is no. We're hoping to have the funds so that we can actually do what we want to do and have been hoping to do all along. Number 3 is New London planning on retaining the same consultants? And the answer is yes, obviously. So we've submitted our answer. As you can tell, I'm the type of person that keeps, I would say, in their face nicely, diplomatically, politely, but I'm calling them appropriately every now and then, checking in. If I sense a nuance of an opportunity that maybe there's something going on, I'll give them a jingle, and they're becoming my new best friends. Let's go over this chart quickly because I think it's helpful. Again, this is not submitted with the any of the application, but it was kind of my doodling and the sequence of how this might come together. When the funds are granted, Steve will, I'm sure, have some revisions, maybe substantial to this, but I had to put it together in my own mind to get there. So the top row, if you will, is Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. You can see that from the left-hand column. And the most right-hand column is Town Meeting 2026. So that's sort of the target if we decide we want to make some recommendations for zoning change. So if you look at Phase 1, we had talked about the demographic study and the report. The housing needs analysis and report has substantially been done by the Regional Planning Commission. And community outreach, presentations, panels, and forums is sort of that third block, if you will, that would happen if things go according to plan. And this relies on the fact that we would see funds as of June 1. That's when our program would start. So we would really have over the winter, there's nothing exact about this. The community outreach could run through till May or June of next year. You can see that I have added a little shading to July and August months that's coming down from those columns. That's because those are less active months, not just for lazy people like me, but also that's a time of year when it's really unfair to expect too much engagement with the community, to hold events, to do things that are substantial because people are on vacation. And in the final analysis, we work for the citizens of the town, and so I shaded those just so I was being mindful of what was happening during that time frame. In Phase 2, we would do more of the land use inventory and mapping, which is underway. That would be refined. It would be interesting to look at conserved land and easement study, the GIS mapping of what is conserved land and where are the easements, what are sort of the protected areas. That might include also water bodies, which are open space, but we can look at it from different perspectives. There was a comment made at one of the hearings for the vote in March that we were the 4th most dense town in our region. And I'd like to understand what that means. What is that? Is that, do you consider the water sheet as being open space and therefore not part of the developable land? Or I want to understand what that means and really parse it out. The third block down would be visioning and mapping and looking at diverse housing opportunities. There are lots of different types of housing that could work in our town. You may remember the book called Missing Middle had some pictures in it that were very helpful, looking at cottage clusters, for example. And if you've followed at all this project in Dover called Harmony Homes, basically is a cottage cluster of 40 cottages. It's for the employees of the construction company, but it's a very interesting configuration of buildings. And actually, we can bring the Randolphs here to make a presentation on that development. That might be worthwhile. I had a chance to tour it, but unfortunately my schedule conflicted. I couldn't see it, but I've seen the presentation several times. There's a block here in the bottom of Phase 2, which is extensive community outreach. That really happens all the way through. But the reason it's a separate block is because we had to attach dollars to it and in the actual exhibit. So that has a standalone block, but it happens all the way through. And in Phase 3, we look at possibly zoning ideas, review our existing zoning, look at detached ADUs, see if it still makes sense, maybe it doesn't, looking at existing land use regulations. And then we'd have a study and presentation on revising the regulations, perhaps, if we're ready and if that seems what we want, and study potential revisions to facilitate workforce housing, because one of our primary focuses here is the missing housing that we don't have. And then it may already be taken care of, but there's a block in our exhibit that I didn't want to lose because it had money attached to it. which is to address the statute on rental conversion, which Adam has quite rightly pointed out. In essence, it's the prohibition of conversion of rental property in the state. So we have to look at that as well. So that was my doodling as I put together the much more elaborate exhibit and resubmitted that to them yesterday. Well, actually, no, it was on the 2nd or the 3rd of April, and then I revised a bit with the errors that were made by me and resubmitted just yesterday. So hopefully, I don't know what their schedule is. I'm not sure they know what their schedule is. I challenged George Regan, who's sort of our liaison at New Hampshire Finance, to say, what do you think the timing is? And basically he said, we are ready. I said, does that mean you have the funds? He said, yes, we have the funds. So it's not sort of an IOU, but they are ready. So that's the update, and that's the chart that is consistent with the exhibit, but I must stress with you that Steve, each time that I check with Steve Whitman to say, does this make sense before I send it back, he said, yes, there's a fair amount of flexibility when you get to the reality of what is the natural next step in this process. And I know how to do that. We will comply, so not to worry. Do you want to move, Mike? Is that sun bothering you? Is that your halo? Okay.
Closest I'm going to get.
So I thought it would be helpful not just to listen to me droll on, but to talk for a few minutes, and maybe your thoughts are not fully gelled, but as soon as we hear that the funds are going to be available, the next step for us is going to be thinking about how do we engage the community? What are the topics? What would we like to have somebody talk on and then have an open discussion on? And how would the format be? Would it be breaking it down into small tables? Would it be putting dots on topics on the wall? What do we think is the best way to connect? I think I shared with you all kind of an unfortunate analysis of the actual number of voters that were voting on these issues that we feel are so important, and they are. But the turnout is pretty light. And I've had a number of coffees with people, community members, to talk about what we should be doing better. And I want to make sure that we engage a lot of the community. And it's not just the people who wonderfully come to meetings and care and are very well informed, but it's those that don't have the time, maybe they're two working parents, maybe it's kids, whatever it is. I really want to get them and reach out to them and find ways to hear what they have to say so that we get a much better interaction and we're that much better informed and hopefully a much better vote. So I'd like to stop for a moment and see if you've had any thoughts as you reflect on what happened in March as to ways and topics that we might use and follow for engaging the community in a very deep and effective way. Yeah, Tom. If you push the button and it turns green, it's on.
You're on. I'm on. Okay. There we go. I just have several points that I'm considering.
Please.
Unfortunately, I was not available to reinforce anything going on prior to the vote, speak with friends and things, which we did throughout our last 2
Can you
years.
speak up, because I can't hear you, and so we're probably not being recorded.
That may be good.
That's better. Thank you.
I think that, unfortunately, as I said before, I missed 3 months, and it was a critical time, January, February, into March. Being able to share that information and thoughts and bring those people and the voters to come to the polls to support it. And when I looked at, and I really appreciate all the hard work that's gone into putting this all together, And a lot of this reminds me of things we've already done. Not quite in that pattern. We were doing it by learning, trying, coming up with a solution. And I think this is a great idea, the way it's patterned out and the steps being taken and of course, the involvement of the consultant and so forth. Another thought I had was in concerning the grant itself, the total fund, whatever it happens to be if we can get it, is that presented as one-time billing or receiving, or does it come over a period of time?
Tom,
Does it go through a
it's a
phase?
reimbursement.
Pardon me?
It's a reimbursement
It's a
program.
reimbursement, okay.
So as we spend it, as long as it's consistent with the application that was approved, we'll provide it funds. And there is some money, by the way, for administrative costs, for marketing, for advertising, for food and refreshments, and it's not just consultants, but we have some expense money, I guess I would describe it, as we need it.
Okay.
Peter?
Yes, Nancy?
I think that, before I get into sort of my thoughts about what happened or whatever, I think initially those two reports on the upper left, once those are completed, that would be critical information to be providing to the community relative to, continuing to outline the need and so forth and where we are with things. I agree with you, understanding that language around density is absolutely critical, because that certainly was like a flagship that got thrown around, not only at these meetings, but certainly at town meeting as well. And I think that, again, and we've talked about this before, but really needing to identify and differentiate what workforce housing really means in terms of the population we're really trying to reach here. Which are, people who work at the schools, the hospital, we've gone through that. I think we understand, but I don't think the person on the street necessarily understands that. And I think we could get better at identifying that and talking about that. And then the last thing is, I think we need to come up with not only the regional plan that Upper Valley is working on, which I think would be helpful, because I think some people are concerned that New London is the only entity looking for a fix, which is not true. But I think the other thing is, it would be helpful if we could present other alternative housing models so that it doesn't appear we're only solely hanging our hats on the detached and attached ADUs, which I don't believe we are. But that was the primary focus of our changes in the rules. So, I don't know, that's just some things that I've been thinking about in this process ever since town meeting.
Good points, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point to stress, that detached ADUs, because I'm not stuck on that idea. I don't think any of us are. So thank you. That's
Well, and just one final thing, and I know Marilyn has some, I guess when we talk about things, it becomes like vision, what my vision is, what your vision is. Never did I anticipate that someone was going to pull a mobile home up into their backyard and say, okay, now I've got a detached ADU. I mean, that was never my expectation of what we've been talking about for so long here. But be that as it may.
But it was a real concern.
It was a concern.
It occurs to me, I think, that we did a really good job educating about the need, that New London and many other communities have this need. And I think where we didn't go enough, and envisioning or in whatever, how that might be met. And I agree, not just by the ADUs, that this was one thing. But I think that, I don't think many people, well, there are some people that don't want more people to move into London, and that's, never going to get around that. But it's not the fact that they're all thinking, oh, we don't want to provide housing for people, but we don't want it like this. So I think maybe by just having that as an alternative, we lost some people that we might have had otherwise. And we were focused on getting something accomplished, which made sense, but it might have been, again, I think we educated well about the need, but not about the alternatives for how that need might be addressed.
Yeah, that's good. That's a very good point, Marilyn. And I was sort of envisioning an education and engagement session with the public in which we'd have an expert, Steve or others, show us different types of housing and engage in a discussion on where could this be. Set your mind free about who owns the property, or don't be constrained by reality. As a developer, I have to tell you, this is painful for me, because ownership of property is one of the most inalienable rights. But to have some vision work, say, for example, if you're going to put housing in, well, how about under the power lines? How about the college has some of the maintenance yards down behind Pizza Chef, or just some free thinking. And it's not that would lock things in or put the owners in a bad position, because it's just free thinking. It's just thinking about form and placement. I do think it's important not to drift into the topic of where the police station would be, just so you're aware of one of my concerns. We need to stay in our lane of housing, which is a challenge enough as it is. But the visioning, I think, which would help us think about alternatives of types and location, and it kind of drives a lot of the way our town is laid out. I met with a housing committee co-leader in Warner yesterday for a cup of coffee. I keep talking to people to learn as much as I can. And he said, well, our town, it's kind of old. And I said, well, now wait a minute. Your town is all in one place. You've got a town center. We have a town center that's got the college and the town hall on one end, and the hospital and the shopping center on the other, and a thin band in between. And so it's hard for us to have a town center. We sort of have two semi-centers, in my humble opinion. And we're blessed. It's a wonderful town, but I mean, as far as a configuration. So if you have a discussion from a planner type who sort of lays this all out and starts to challenge the community in the meeting as to where things could go, it could be exciting.
I don't know how we'd ever get this information, but there must be a way. It occurred to me at some point that I would really like to know why people voted against it. Did they understand what they were voting against? Did they vote against it because they saw a sign that said, vote no on this? Or did they really have, because I want to know the real concerns, and I don't know how we'd ever get that information.
Well, I've been making it my mission since the vote to try to do that, because one of the frustrating things about any vote is it's binary, it's yes or no. And it doesn't, and when you get a no, it's not like your mother telling you can't have another cookie. The answer is no, maybe it's not now, maybe it's not this way, or maybe it's never. And in the connections that I've tried to make with people of different opinions, a number of perspectives come up. And this is in no particular order, but it would come as no surprise, perhaps, that one of them is, we don't want the town to change. And I say we because they're expressing their own opinion, but they felt that it was well backed. We like the town the way it is. And yes, there's some stresses that are going on in the economy and in the world around us, but we don't want it to change. The other, another comment that was,
Can I just say?
yes, please.
And I think if you have a conversation and that's the response, then the question follow-up is, how do you think it's going to change? And if you don't like that, what could we do differently that would make it more appealing? I mean, it leads to so much there. I don't want to change. Well, people aren't good about change, you know.
Yeah.
So I would just want to just pry a little bit more if they're willing and say, well, what do you think is going to change? What's going to bother you the most about, what is it really that's going to bother you?
Some of the accessory point, and this is in no particular order. This is the number one and number two, because everybody has their own opinions and we want them all. But some of the effects related to change would be traffic, would be congestion, would be inconvenience. So that's one perspective. And another point of view, and I think one of my principles is never to have regrets. My life is run, you do the best you can and don't have regrets, but learn what happened. And one of the things I think I heard, which is quite accurate, is we didn't do a very good job of communicating the effects of what we were thinking about. We didn't have any on the ground, here's about how many places detached ADUs might go. The concern about manufactured housing, mobile home trailers. We didn't get out in the beginning that they're not allowed in commercial district and the R1 district. We knew that, but we didn't put it out there. So one of the things I thought we could have done better is to communicate better. And some of that is my fault because, as I've said before to others, Adam and others, the Housing Commission is an advisory board. And we're advisory to the Planning Board and the Select Board, but we have no authority. And so when the Planning Board adopted our idea, I sort of didn't want to get in the way of their messaging, of their championing. And I think, this is just one person's opinion, I think we could do a better job of that. Dealing with what the meaning is, on-the-ground meaning of what we were proposing as far as the effects, I think would have made a big difference. Still might have gone down, but been much better informed. And there's some other ideas, but those are some of the prominent ones. To quickly address the point of change, my thought about change is that you can't stop it. If you want to preserve the town character, everything is changing. We're all getting a day older each day. Technology is changing. The number of people are changing, the number of cars are changing, everything's always changing. So if you want to keep it the way it is, you're better off adapting to change that's going to happen in ways that you want it to happen versus just trying to say no change at all. And I don't know, that's a very long description about change and how you deliver that message. Tom?
Perhaps as we move along, maybe that question ought to be something we use all the time. When we speak to other groups, individuals, and they're concerned about the character of the town, define it. I don't think we have a definition. The character is an impression. And a lot of the people in our town come from elsewhere because of the quality of the individuals that are coming, the quality of the town, how it's governed and run, the college town as well. We're not far from any of the large cities. It's really a welcoming place. But I think we have to define the character. And if we look back at the master plan, which indicated that the direction we were going is what people wanted. But you're right. Everything changes in time. We change, the town changes, the road surface changes, everything. But I think maybe defining what the people want as the character could also be part of it. That may be a positive thing because, oh, that's a great idea. You're right. I do see it that way. I'm not sure we asked that question.
That could be a whole visioning session on its own.
Yes,
What is the town character?
yes.
I'm struggling with this because it's so multivariate and so changeable, whether you like change or not. And one of the things that has happened to me, I've been here for almost 13 years now. And so I'm one of those people from away. Now, my away is Essex Junction, Vermont. But before that, I lived in Westchester County, and so I'm from away. And I liked it here. I moved here because I liked it here. But since I've been here, I've had some conversations with some people who have been here all of their lives, who are my age. And the town has changed dramatically for them in the 73 years that they've been here. It's a lovely place today. It was a nice place, as far as I can tell, a very lovely place years ago, 50 years ago. It will change. If you think it won't change, all you need to do is go look at some mill towns and see what's happened to them as they became hidebound about how they were going to live and operate. And yet, we are where we are today. And I think one of the things, and Peter, you hit on it very well, which is that things will change. And we have an opportunity to have some influence over what that change looks like. If we don't take that bull by the horns, change will be forced upon us, either by a centralized government or by economic circumstances or by the fact that we all are getting a day older every year or every day. I wish I was getting a day older every year, but it's not working out quite like that. And I wasn't born on the 29th of February either, so I don't have any real excuses. The problem is that we heard from the community that they wanted certain things, and then certain parts of the community said, well, no, that's not what we want. And the vote turned out the way it turned out. What do we do? How do we have that conversation? And how do you pry or probe more deeply into the why? And so, okay, so then what do you suggest to the person who's saying, no change? What do you suggest to allow this to continue to be a vibrant community, not just a community where people come for 4 weeks a year or 4 months a year or whatever it is, and then go on about their business? These are complex questions that housing is a part of. And one other thought was that I saw a significant conflating between workforce housing and affordable housing. It was convenient to allow that to be merged and into one single topic. They are not the same. And they are similar. They might bump up against each other. If you have a Venn diagram that looks like this, there are places where they will intersect, but they are not the same. And we need to be able to do things like avoiding that conversation or deflecting that conversation. Or clarifying that no, that's... Well, you can't avoid it, but you can avoid having it be conflated, or you can do your best to avoid having it be conflated, because you're not going to stop people who want to have it conflated. Having said that, better knowledge, better understanding, what does it mean, where should it go, and what should it look like? I mean, I spent time across the river over there looking at this question for years, and that's always a challenge, but there were some good ideas. I think the cluster housing is an appropriate way to do it. You manage around things like that so that you maintain a reasonable amount of open space. You have significant density at one little spot, but the rest of it is green. There's a lot of different ways to get to the place where people that work here will want to and can live here. And that's important to me. I don't feel I have the right to say, okay, well, I'm here. And I have a lovely view where I live. I don't have a big house, but I have a lovely view where I live. It's a lovely community and all those things. Having said that, there are other people will want to live here, including the people that work here. And I think it's only fair that the community figure out a way to make that happen. All of the community.
Some very good points, Mike, and sort of stirred my thinking a little bit too. Your point about the mill towns is really kind of scary when you think about it, but it's so true. And it reminds me of the comment that Tom Mannion made at one of the forums, I think it was at Colby Sawyer, or maybe it was during the employer forum that we put on, where he basically implied that if we don't do something about housing, the hospital could look very differently or maybe not be around. And I'm mindful of the fact that VNA announced, I think it was last year, they reduced their geographic region, their reach, because they didn't have the staffing. That's scary.
It is scary, and housing is a part of that. I don't think housing is all of it. I spent time in the state of Vermont researching the whole demographic challenge, the things that they ought to do to try to make adjustments to that, and it was a very interesting exercise. But it just reminded you that this is a hugely multivariate equation that you're trying to solve for constantly, and every time you push the balloon here, it goes that way someplace else. So, but it's true. There are very few businesses that are so wedded to their geography that you're not going to be at risk of losing them. Staffing was the most significant decision that large employers were making. This is back 20 years ago, but it's not changed much. Staffing is the most significant decision people make about when they're deciding to expand or stay. Are there people that can work here? Will they work here? How does that work? I mean, when I came to work for Ledyard in Hanover, I chose to live in New London because New London was a very nice place to live, et cetera, et cetera. But how does that work? And how big is the circle around which people want to commute from? And does that make sense for our community for them to commute from that distance? There's a lot. Workforce housing is critically important. Demographics are critically important. How do you keep them down on the farm to come and to live and work here? So I could pontificate on this all day long.
No, but another good point I heard you say was that, and it's true, that housing is not the only cause to the staffing issue, but it is a significant one because, for example, if you are a young person and you want to move here, or if you want to get a job at the college or some other business, you want to live within a reasonable commuting distance, which you had mentioned. So point well taken. Housing is at the core of it. Yeah.
It's not the only reason is accurate. Obviously, there's not only have you got, is there housing, but there's the affordability of housing. And right now, it's almost impossible. Well, last I looked the other day, there were 4 houses available in New London. Most of them were over $600,000. I think the mean, I forget what the mean was lately, but it was bad for the state even.
500.
Yeah, 550 plus, I think, actually, but I don't know. It's gone high. So you've got, so that the affordable housing is different than the workforce housing.
Lowercase a.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing that whirls around here is people don't want New London to change, and they don't want the character of New London to change. One of the things that contributes to the character of New London is that we have a mixed population. We've got I know, because I've got grandkids, I know a lot of people that have got kids in kindergarten and kids going through the elementary schools. And, we want them, yes, it'd be nice for them to work here, but we want them to live here too, because we don't want to turn into a community of retired people. And the problem is, if we do that, the VNA is going to be in a situation where they're going to say, well, I'm going to call and say, gee, I need somebody to come over and help me tomorrow. And they said, I'm sorry, we don't have enough people. We can come on Friday, but we can't come tomorrow. So, yeah, or whatever. But I just think that part of the charm and character of this community is that we do have, a mix. And it's a mix of, people that are still working, people that are semi-retired, people that, and young people who are working hard. And so I just think that's part of the character, that we have to try to make a way for them to be here too. And if they can work here, that's great. But it's that also sort of in the middle, a bunch of people who might be, in their late 20s, and, they've got kids, and where are we going to have our kids go to school? Do we want to go to Kearsarge? Do we want to go to, that's a whole thing that contribute, to the character of the whole community.
So true.
I think this all circles back around to the point you made, Peter, that the conversation needs to be deeper and more probing than yes, no, and what you really have to find out what the objections are. What if you object to this, what do you propose instead? How do we get from here to there? And those kinds of wide-ranging conversations with the community about how you continue to, let's just say, keep New London a vital community. It doesn't need to become a small-town rural theme park, okay, which is at risk of being. So, when I first moved to Burlington, Vermont, the Burlington area, I had a friend who we went over to their place for dinner, and this was in 1985, so a while ago. But the comment that they made was, a nice place about Burlington is that it's so close to Vermont. And Burlington is different. The Chittenden County is different from the rest of Vermont, but it was a very telling, and I would be reluctant to find myself living in a town that was so close to New Hampshire.
I'll just add one quick thing, and then Karen has some thoughts to share with us. When my wife and I talk about places that are cool, where we had a lot of fun going to visit, I think of Burlington, or I think of other college towns. Ann Arbor, Michigan, we had a daughter who went to school there, and it's a really cool town. Why is it so cool? It has a lot of young people. And it's vibrant, and there's some restaurants, and it's active. And we have a lot of the components in our town, and we need to protect them and keep them and let them grow in the right way. But I just was reflecting on Burlington, which is now having some trouble, but they go through cycles, and but it's the young people that make it a really cool thing. Karen, if you would use the microphone, it's not that we're formal, but we're being recorded, so thank you. We're very informal.
Got it. Hi, Karen Epstein, and it's really nice to hear everyone's comments, and I just have a few to share myself, if that would be okay.
Please, yeah.
And so communication is important as well as listening. And I'll just say I'm one of those people that attended pretty regularly the housing meetings and the planning boards, and I'll just would like to add, extrapolate on that a bit. When it got to the point of having the hearings, I think December was the first hearing, and then the second hearing was in January. So there were new people start to come when it's at the point of the hearing. And I heard some new things. I learned a lot by these new people coming in the room. And they were asking questions that raised questions in my mind that I hadn't thought about on my own, because not being in the business, it's not something I have any experience with. So I just wanted to share with you a few things that stood out to me because they seemed very reasonable. A gentleman raised, I believe, for the mostly at the first hearing, was the idea of, in terms of the zoning questions, I believe 1, 2, and 4, that are in the larger discussion. I think it was more of a general statement, that it's important to have safeguards in place, and an approach that involves an incremental approach is sometimes a very wise way to go. And I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not trying to speak for the person. I'm just sharing what was my general impression with what he had to say. And that seemed very, very, it seemed to be a very cogent point to me, that there was a lot on the plate for that particular ballot, for that particular vote. And I thought when the voters went to the polls and the results came back, that they specifically voted no on 1, 2, and 4, and voted yes on 3 and 5. So that said to me that they were, they just didn't go in and do a blanket no. They paid attention to what the questions were, and I think there was a question, number 6 as well, that voted no, but that was per the recommendation of the planning board. So to me, that showed some selectivity, therefore some awareness as to what they were being asked. So safeguards, incrementalism. Also, what got my attention in the January hearing, one of the closing comments, I believe it came from the planning board, was that the definition of change, of the goal on housing turned to diversity of housing. And that was not really explained. So to your point of workforce, affordable, and then introduced at the end of the meeting was a discussion on diversity of housing. And I hadn't talked to a person afterwards that kind of was clear on what that meant. So that's another thing. Identifying areas of impact would have been helpful as well, because these are 3 major zoning questions, going from both cluster and planned unit, going from 5-acre minimum down to none, no particular size being required. And there were questions that had come up in terms of what is the potential, like what does that open us up to? So that kind of gets back to the incrementalism, safeguards, and identifying potential areas of impact, not expecting anyone to have a crystal ball, but just knowing that, we're having that discussion so that you can kind of picture it, as opposed to having kind of these 3, what were to me very significant questions all on the table at once, and being asked, as you say, a yes or a no. So I just wanted to share that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That is very helpful. And would encourage you, we keep our meetings pretty informal because we're not a regulatory body, but we need to be listening a lot and generating new ideas, and if we stand on too much formality, it gets stifled. So thank you. Don't hesitate to speak up. Any other thoughts or comments? These are all good ideas. I would add, you asked what were some of the comments that I heard, or maybe I offered in my talking with various people of different points of view. The other point that I heard, or another point I heard, was the timing for what we were doing. There was a lot of reluctance and concern about the impact of Twin Pines and Continuum, and sort of a sense, it's just one perspective of, hey, wait, we don't really know what this feels like yet. We have a sense that Twin Pines is happening. We don't know Continuum is happening too, but it's been going on for longer. So there was some awareness of that and what that really meant. But still, it could happen, and that's 150, 160 units, whatever it is, and whatever it will ultimately be. But Twin Pines is moving forward, and their funding's good, and it looks like I think I forwarded on to you their update. Their wells they found water, now they need to do their drawdown test. There's a vision of breaking ground. So the timing of what was going on in the town at the time and saying maybe this is too much too fast, maybe to Karen's point about incrementalism. Any other thoughts? It's all good thinking. This is, I'm sort of envisioning that when we hear from New Hampshire Housing Finance that we are ready to go and the money is going to be available, we will, by the way, have to enter into a contract agreement with them, right? We have a grant agreement. So there's another step. It's not like, okay, here's the checkbook.
Right, they'll produce an agreement for the selectmen to sign on to, and then we will have an agreement with the consultant.
So there's some contractual stuff that has to happen. But as soon as we know that it's in the works, this discussion is going to be coming to fruition with Steve Whitman and his team, because they will be terrific leaders. So keep this in mind as you go about your daily lives and have a moment to reflect. Keep in mind what would be a good venue, what would be a good topic leader. It's always helpful to have a speaker or somebody who lays out some information to stimulate thinking, and then have an open discussion in some way or another that is very fruitful, and as Mike pointed out, and I think we all feel, a deeper conversation with the community. I got your quote right here. Terrific, thank you.
Pete,
Yes, Tom.
another thought, we were talking about reaching out, getting information. Why not sponsor facilitating sessions with particular groups?
Say that again, I didn't quite understand.
Facilitating sessions.
Yeah, facilitating sessions, yeah.
Which means, let's say we pick an age group, because we want to see some changes, but those who are elderly like the way it is, so they're not going to be very supportive. Those in the middle can fluctuate based on their economies, and the younger people who we don't want to lose, we want to keep them here, may have other goals. And all within the framework of housing, and how can we keep people here and how can we expand? And having a good facilitator, I know Steve Whitaker is an excellent facilitator. And those groups alone, let them lead the way by giving us the goal. And how do we get there? There may be some thoughts coming out that we haven't realized yet. We've bounced them around, but we haven't put them in a direction yet. So maybe that would be it. Just an idea, just throw it out there.
Yeah, you know, I've been reflecting. Marilyn, go ahead.
Oh, I was just getting ready.
Oh, just kidding?
Listening.
Okay. I'll just throw something out there, because my mind spins on this stuff. How could we get somebody, when my wife and I were married and we had kids and I was working flat out and she was too, we didn't have time for any of this stuff. I was unplugged from town. I had to be, because I worked not in the town. So I was thinking, well, back then, what would have been one way to encourage young families to be able to come? And I thought, you know what we could do? We have the funds to work with. We could hire some daycare support, and say, come to a meeting, we'll have pizza and dinner, and we're going to have daycare, so you can come for an hour.
Movies in the other room.
Movies, yeah. If that's really what we want to do, there are ways to do it. Let's think outside the box. Yeah.
It's a big subject to wrap our heads around, and there's so many facets to it, and so much information that we want to get. It's that organizational part of it, of where do we start, what are our goals, what is the theme of, how do we get it, so we can lay it out like this and say, okay, this is our ultimate goal, obviously. I mean, it's challenging because there's so many facets to it. Mm-hmm. But we've got plenty of time, so.
Yeah, I had lunch with somebody of different points of view today, and his or her comment was, what you could do is to have these sessions with enough distance in between whether they be at Colby Sawyer or what have you, and have them on different topics that tie together with enough distance of time in between them so there's absorption and generation of new thought, and then have a reporting phase at the end of that that says, okay, here's what we heard you say. So to your point of how to organize it,
Determining how to,
Yeah.
what those
what's the sequence and
sequences,
what's the logical way to do this? It's one thing for us to hear something, but if we don't put it back out there as to what we heard, then, then we're missing a great opportunity. So I would add to that, the reporting sequence, part of the sequence is pretty important too. How we say, here's what we heard, because we may say, here's what we heard, and we may get some pushback, say, well, you thought you heard that, but not, so. And we're all trying to do the right thing by the community. You want to add something?
No, I think Neil was trying to get your attention.
Oh, Neil, you want to add? Yeah, please. Yeah, unfortunately, because we don't have somebody taking notes, she's not well today, so she's going to do it from the recorded version.
Sure.
Neil, please.
Yeah. I excuse me, I'm getting a little cold, but I love the idea of the reaching out to people in my sort of demographic, people with kids, and making it here tonight took an act of Congress in my household, and I love the idea of having childcare. You won't be able to find any of them because they don't live here because we voted down ADUs. But if we could find somebody to take care of my kids, I love that idea. And the truth is, leading up to the vote, every parent that I reached out to had no context for what these questions were, why they were important. All it takes is saying, hey, remember in the fall when we couldn't hire somebody to teach our kids' second grade class because they couldn't find a place to live? You're like, oh, yeah, right, okay, this is important. And subsequently, everybody voted for the questions, but I didn't see, like, Marilyn, you said that we think you did a good job educating people, and I think that's probably true, but I think that there's also opportunities to do better, and certainly, I didn't see anybody at Windy Hill or Kearsarge Elementary, during the fall festival or whatever, places where you could actually engage with lots of parents all at once and educate them. And I really care a great deal about this topic, so I'm willing to go through the frankly hassle in my household of making it to these types of things, but most families can't, and you have to meet them where they are. And I think they might see the topic differently than someone who's 65 or 85. I'm 45, and so and I have really little kids, and so I see it, from that perspective right now, where we feel the pain of this day in and day out, but I don't think people understand that housing plays such a key role, and all you have to have is a pretty quick conversation, and people's eyes light up pretty quickly, and I think. While I have the microphone, it's sort of an unrelated topic, but I think also maybe on the housing, just sort of the diversity of housing and getting people to understand what an ADU even is. I think certainly in, again, my demographic, it's a real fuzzy topic. I think if I walked up to 20 people in Hannaford and asked them what an ADU was, I'd probably get 15 blank stares, 4 wildly different, definitions, and maybe one that's pretty close. And it's a very sort of technocratic term. What are you doing? I'm just dwelling in my accessory unit. It's not something that we would ever say, right? So I think there's this opportunity to even redefine how we talk about these things so that it's more accessible for people to understand. And so anyway, that's just my
Excellent.
word salad of thoughts. But
Excellent. Thank you. Good ideas. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts to add? This is very constructive. We'll put this all to work, I'm hoping, as soon as we hear good news from New Hampshire Housing. Adam, we always like to keep a space for current housing updates. I did send around the update from Twin Pines, but please.
That's really the only update that we have, that they hope to get the road in to do the test wells very soon, which I think you all saw that update from Peter earlier. Other than that, sort of status quo on the current projects. keeping posted. So Continuum did do their 72-hour test. I talked to them about halfway into that, and things were going well, but they haven't produced the final report yet. That was just last week. So,
Adam, I keep, somehow, every time I drive by the old College Sports Shop, I think, how many dwelling units are going to be out back there? And then somebody asks me, and I say, I can't, I'm going to find out.
so it's
Five?
five, three on so from the street level, 3, and then on the side
Walk-
garden apartments,
walk-
there's
walk
2.
out kind of
Yep.
thing. Yep, okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And it's a contractor, property owner that's doing them. So I think as his crews, have gaps in their schedule, they're pecking away at things. So it's taking a little bit longer. But
And I just want to say, I can't imagine a better location for something like that. You've got 5 dwelling units. You really have to look to see them. And they're going to be attractive when he's done. It's exciting, really.
the very best part about the entire project is that it will have a real parking lot now. So there will be no more backing over the sidewalk and into Main Street for folks out front once that's complete. I think that leaves us with only one other property on Main Street that has parking backing over a pedestrian area into Main Street. So hopefully we'll be 0 at some point in time, another 20 years. But
You're talking about Bonin?
yep.
Adam, do we know if they're intended to be rentals or home ownership
They're rentals at this point.
at this point?
Yep.
Good.
I haven't heard anything to the contrary.
Good. I haven't seen any marketing information, but like most apartment rentals, they may not need to market, given that the vacancy is less than 1%. Terrific, thank you. There is always a formal place in our agenda for public comment. You've been wonderful generous to give us your ideas along the way, but I will stop and say, do you have anything else you'd like to add, or some other topic we haven't covered? Please, this is the time. Rich? Yes, please. And for the record, if you would identify yourself, thanks.
Rich Epstein, as probably you all know, as somebody who I campaigned against the zoning changes, I wouldn't know how to start making comments back to all the comments I heard earlier. Have a whole different view of it. But one thing that did jump out, you somewhat talked about, educating the public, but it turned out we needed to educate the powers that be who did not read the guidelines from the state or the statute. That really jumped out. And so I think doing thorough research will really help. People were very concerned about unintended consequences. And
Rich, I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying very well. Can you speak up a little bit more? Unintended consequences, yes, go ahead.
yes, unintended consequences could result when there hasn't been thorough research. And to the average citizen, they could see this could potentially be a major change. And when I used the term major change, I believe at the planning board meeting, so no, this isn't major. Well, if somebody next door gets a second house added to the property, they consider that a major change. And all the importance of workforce housing, and everybody can certainly agree, but what I think is missing is New London can't solve that. That's a regional, let alone state issue. So, when you talk about who to bring in, can you bring in contractors who could build cluster developers to see, would they even consider a cluster developer in New London, versus just make zoning changes because could be maybe possibly we could get cluster development in? I think that might be something when the research is done that might be really telling if you could get actually contractors who say, yeah, we would be interested in if you could only make this zoning change. And maybe they'd find out, oh, okay, if you make the zoning change, well, that's good, but Wilmot's still much more attractive than you. So I really think a thorough level of research, not just in the town, but of the region, is really necessary to do an adequate job so people have confidence that the zoning changes are thoroughly considered. Thank you.
That's interesting. And of course, as a former developer, one of the things we did, at least in a more of a metropolitan area, is we always looked for opportunity and gaps in zoning bylaws. And we were watching very carefully when town meeting time came up to those towns where zoning was being changed. Because if you can get out ahead of it, then you've got a good leg up. So the problem is we don't have that dynamic development community knocking on our door. But the point's well taken. Is to one of the objectives we have as a housing commission is to bring the best ideas for changing zoning, to invite private capital to build. And there are ways to reach out to developers, but you need to have a story. It's helpful if you have a property you can suggest is available for them to develop. But it's a step that comes after the zoning is changed. It's hard to get a developer to spend their time spinning their wheels on a hypothetical. But we have developers in town, builders in town, and we've had conversations with some of them. And so we should do a better job of that. Thank you. Rich, you made reference to a statute in your point. Could you elaborate a little bit about what you meant by that? I didn't quite understand when you were referencing a statute.
Yes, well, there was the statute that about mobile homes or manufactured homes.
Okay.
That somehow was missed, and that was also about there were comments in the guidelines that it was mentioned twice if people had read that. And I think it reflected on whether or not people had confidence that the work has been actually researched. And, people keep flagging the town plan, what was it called again? Master plan.
Master
sorry.
plan, yeah.
Master plan.
Yeah.
And, you can easily see how the supposed results could really have been misunderstood. Karen already talked about this leap to housing diversity. I think that was a leap that I don't think really had enough justification behind it. Somebody who said, oh yeah, I could see having workforce housing and elderly care, those are probably the top two things. Oh yeah, sure, that's diversity. I'll check off diversity in housing. Then of course, when you saw like mobile homes at the bottom, somehow that all got missed when people were assessing everything. And also, what just popped into my head, I didn't mention it earlier, I talked to obviously many people who were supportive of what we were doing. I didn't hear anybody talk about wanting no change. So I assume you have, but the people who I was talking to who were against the zoning changes, nobody. I can't think of one person who actually said they don't want New London to change.
I've heard it. Again, I'm not putting these in order of this is the most common I've heard because they're diverse and people have their own opinions. So I'm not judgmental or putting emphasis, but I did hear that.
Okay. Oh, another thing just popped into my head.
Yeah.
So, it's great, everybody for good reason, comment that it's good to have the hospital here. Well, and then they say, oh, but we have so many elderly people. Well, people like elderly people go to New London, move to New London because of the hospital. I remember when we moved in, one of our neighbors came by and said, look how great this is for elderly people. We've got a hospital right down the road. So,
Yes.
you somewhat can't, excuse me?
Not just elderly people.
Oh, yeah, yes,
The
true.
community is very happy to have that hospital there.
Yeah, good point.
But that's what, a neighbor came by right when we moved into the house, and it was how, he specifically commented about how it's good for elderly because of things like that.
Yeah, and I've heard from a couple people of different ages that the urgent care program at the hospital is immensely helpful. It's sort of the first place you can go with a child who bumped her head or ear infection or, just any age, any problem. So, yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful. I
Thank
want
you.
to understand each and every point of view. So any other thoughts? No? Great, great. Then let's talk about the next meeting. May 1st is when, I had mentioned this earlier, so I won't reiterate the whole thing, but Steve Whitman and Zach Brohinsky are going to be here. I scheduled a meeting at 7 o'clock exactly for this reason. It's now almost 7 o'clock, and I really wanted the graphics to be visible on the screen because it's impressive and it's interactive, and you can ask questions. Well, now click on this, and what are the two-bedroom buildings? Or it's very interactive, and I want to stress the visibility of that. So we'll be setting up the arrangement in a little different way so that we can all see it better, including the commission. So we'll have to figure out the way to do that. But that is our next meeting and very exciting. I have not scheduled or proposed a meeting for after that because I'm certainly hoping by then we know something from New Hampshire Housing Finance, and it may be that we don't need to meet until we know more or need to do something. So I never want to schedule unnecessary meetings. We generally tend to go every 3 weeks or so, oftentimes more frequently if we need to, or later if we need to. So I'll just keep you posted, but May 1st is going to be exciting. Any other thoughts, comments? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.